I still can't quite wrap my head around everything that's happened. My name's Evan, and my life took a wild turn 2 weekends ago at a wedding of all places. My sister-in-law's wedding, to be exact. To give some background, I've been married to Liz for 3 years, and we were together for 2 years before that. 5 years, we've been building a life together, and everything seemed pretty solid. That is, until her sister's wedding turned my world upside down. Liz had been super busy in the 2 weeks leading up to the wedding, which wasn't a big deal. I knew she was helping her sister with all the wedding prep, spending nights at her sister's place, running around getting things ready. I didn't think much of it. It's her sister's big day, after all. I showed up at her parents' house the morning of the wedding, hoping to catch her for just a minute before everything kicked off. I hadn't seen her since Tuesday, and I missed her, but when I got there, she didn't come out to greet me right away. Instead, she sent her brother out to the car to tell me she'd be out in a second. I thought that was a little weird. Why couldn't she just come to the door like usual? But I shrugged it off. When she finally came out, she kissed me, but she looked serious. She said she had to talk to me about something and didn't want it to ruin her sister's day. Right then, I knew something was up. She said. Evan, there's a chance you might hear some things at the reception about me and the best man, Tom. I just want you to know ahead of time that it was nothing serious. It was a long time ago, and I don't want it to be awkward for you. I just sat there, stunned. She explained that she had a fling with him 4 years ago, before we were married, and it didn't mean anything. She said she didn't want me to be surprised if it came up. I didn't know how to react in that moment. 4 years ago? We'd been together for 5. That meant this fling happened while we were dating. But instead of making a scene, I just nodded and told her I appreciated her telling me. She kissed me again and went back inside the house to get ready for the ceremony. Meanwhile, I went to grab a bite to eat before heading to the church. As I sat there, it started to sink in. She said the fling happened 4 years ago, but we had been together for 5. Something didn't add up. The more I thought about it, the more I started to remember a stretch of time, about 1.5 years into our relationship, when Liz had been acting off. She was distant, unavailable, and went on a couple of weekend camping trips with friends from work that never really made sense to me. I brushed it off at the time, thinking I was just being paranoid. But now it was making sense. I felt sick. This was no small fling she was confessing to. She had cheated on me, and the worst part, she acted like it was no big deal. I tried to push the thought away and focus on the wedding. I didn't want to cause a scene or let my feelings ruin the day. I showed up at the church, sat down, and watched the ceremony. It was beautiful, but I was too distracted to enjoy any of it. Every time I glanced at Liz, all I could think about was Tom, the best man, standing up there with her, knowing that they had been together behind my back. After the ceremony, there was the usual line where guests congratulated the bride and groom. I shook hands with everyone, including Tom, who stood next to Liz, looking completely casual, like nothing had ever happened. I played along, keeping my feelings buried for the sake of keeping up appearances. When we got to the reception, Liz sat down with me, and I could feel the tension building. I was trying to act normal, but it was hard. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped another bomb. "I'm going to be dancing with Tom," she said casually, as if she were talking about the weather. I just stared at her. "Why him?" I asked She explained that the maid of honor was married to another groomsman, so she'd be dancing with her husband, and Liz was left to dance with Tom. I was already on edge, and this pushed me further. But again, I tried to keep it together. I didn't want to ruin her sister's day, and I sure as hell didn't want to make a scene. So I gritted my teeth and told her it was fine. When the time came for the bridal party dance, I watched as Tom came over, extended his arm, and Liz got up to dance with him. I looked away, trying not to let my anger show. When they finished dancing, they came back to the table, laughing and joking like old friends. Liz introduced me to Tom, and I forced myself to shake his hand, though it took everything I had not to tell him to screw off. They sat there, reminiscing about old times while I just sat there stewing. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, needing a moment to calm down. When I came back, Tom was gone, and Liz was sitting there, looking irritated. She told me I was being rude, which was the last thing I wanted to hear. I tried to brush it off, but she kept pushing, saying I was acting like a child. I told her this wasn't the time or place to talk about it, and we'd deal with it later. She got huffy and said she was going to change clothes and tell her sister we were leaving because I had ruined her day. But I didn't want to cause any more drama, so I told her I was fine to stay. Liz went off to change, and when she came back, she was clearly still upset. I hadn't even said anything to her about Tom, but I guess she could see from my face that I was miserable. She kept insisting that we leave, but I didn't want to go. I wasn't about to cause more of a scene, but the longer we stayed, the more uncomfortable things got. At one point, she accused me of acting like a silverback gorilla, like I was getting ready to fight Tom. I didn't know whether to laugh or be offended. The whole situation was ridiculous. But instead of arguing, I sat down and tried to make it through the rest of the reception. We left at the same time and drove home separately. By the time I got there, I was emotionally drained. I sat in the living room, waiting for her, trying to figure out what to say. When she finally came in, she didn't waste any time. She sat down, and I asked her to tell me the story about Tom again, word for word. She repeated the same story she had told me in the car. Then I hit her with the question that had been eating at me all day. "Are you sure about the timing?" She looked me in the eye and said she was. That's when I reminded her that we had been together for 5 years, and she had just told me the fling happened 4 years ago, right in the middle of our relationship. She didn't even flinch. She just said, "I know." When Liz said, "I know," I just sat there, stunned. My stomach twisted in knots, and I didn't know whether to scream or break down. There was no panic in her voice, no stammering or backpedaling. She just admitted it, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "I know," she repeated. "It happened when we were together. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't think it would matter anymore, and I didn't want to hurt you. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut." "You didn't think it would matter?" I asked, my voice barely holding back the anger I felt rising inside me. "Liz, we were in a relationship. You cheated on me, and you're telling me now, years later, like it's no big deal?" Her expression softened, and she reached out for my hand, but I pulled back. "Evan, it wasn't like that," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm for what she was admitting. "It was just physical. We weren't in a great place at the time. I never had feelings for him, and I wasn't planning on leaving you." I sat there in disbelief. I had so many questions swirling in my mind, but none of them mattered in that moment. All I could focus on was the fact that she didn't even seem to grasp how huge this was for me. "You cheated on me," I said, my voice low, trying to keep myself from exploding. "And instead of feeling guilty about it, you're telling me it didn't mean anything, like that's supposed to make it better?" Liz sighed, as if she were the one dealing with frustration. "Evan, I'm not trying to downplay it. I'm just trying to explain that it didn't affect how I felt about you. It was a mistake. I was stupid. But it was years ago, and we're married now. I love you, and this doesn't change anything." That's when I lost it. "This doesn't change anything." I shot up from the couch, pacing back and forth, my hands shaking. "How can you say that? How can you sit there and act like this is just some minor detail from the past that doesn't matter? You slept with someone else while we were together, and now you're telling me to just brush it off because it was before we got married?" She stood up too, trying to calm me down. "Evan, I'm sorry, I really am. But I didn't tell you because I didn't think it would matter anymore. I didn't want to hurt you. I never thought you'd find out." That last sentence hit me hard. "You never thought I'd find out," I repeated slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. "So you were just going to keep this a secret for the rest of our lives? You never planned to tell me, did you?" She looked down, avoiding my eyes. "No," she admitted. "I didn't think I needed to. We're married now. I didn't want to dredge up something that would only cause pain." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In her mind, our marriage was a reset button, a way to erase everything that had come before, including the cheating. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to understand why I was so upset. We stood there in silence for what felt like forever, the tension between us thick in the air. I was trying to hold myself together, but every second that passed only made me angrier. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal, a violation of everything I thought we had built together. And now, instead of trying to make things right, she was telling me I was overreacting. "I need time to think," I said finally, turning toward the door. I couldn't be in the same room as her anymore. Not right then, Dot. But Liz wasn't having it. "There's nothing to think about," she insisted, her tone shifting to one of frustration. "We love each other. We're married. This doesn't change anything. You're being childish, Evan." That was it. The final straw. "Childish?" I spat, turning back to face her. "You cheat on me, keep it a secret for years, and then tell me I'm being childish for being upset about it?" "Yes!" she shouted, her voice rising with her own frustration. "It happened years ago, Evan. It's not like I've been unfaithful since we've been married. You're acting like this one thing from the past is going to destroy everything we've built together. It's ridiculous." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was no remorse, no real apology. She wasn't sorry for cheating on me. She was sorry I had found out. I felt the weight of years of trust and love crumbling in that moment. "I need space," I said, my voice tight with anger. "I can't deal with this right now." I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, leaving her standing there, calling after me to come back. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. For the next few days, I barely spoke to Liz. I stayed in the guest room, keeping to myself and trying to process everything. My emotions swung wildly between rage and sadness. One minute, I wanted to scream at her for betraying me, and the next, I felt like curling into a ball and crying over the future I thought we had together. Liz tried to talk to me, but every time she did, it ended in another argument. She couldn't understand why I wasn't willing to just move on, why I couldn't accept that it was all in the past, and the more she pushed me to get over it, the more resentful I became. Eventually, the argument stopped. Liz gave me space, sensing that I wasn't ready to talk, but she didn't stop trying to reach out. She left me little notes around the house, sent me texts saying she loved me, and made an effort to act like everything was fine between us. But it wasn't fine. Not by a long shot. The worst part was, I still loved her. That's what made it so hard. If I didn't care, I could have just walked away. But I did care. I cared deeply, and that's what made the betrayal cut so deep. I didn't know how to reconcile the woman I loved with the woman who had cheated on me and kept it a secret for so long. About a week later, things took a turn I wasn't expecting. I came home from work one evening to find Liz sitting on the couch, pale and shaking. She looked up at me with tear-streaked eyes, and before I could ask what was wrong, she broke down in sobs. "I'm so sorry, Evan," she cried, her voice barely audible through her tears. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've been awful, but I'm scared. I'm so scared of losing you." She was having a full-blown panic attack. Her breathing was shallow. Her hands were trembling and her face was flushed with panic. I had never seen her like this before. I rushed over to her, unsure of what to do. "Liz, breathe. It's okay. Just breathe." She clutched my arm, gasping for air. "I need you," she choked out between sobs. "Please don't leave me." It was like all of her frustration and anger had crumbled away, leaving behind someone terrified of losing the life we had built together. I sat with her, trying to calm her down, unsure of how we had gone from fighting to this in such a short span of time. The next day, we ended up in the emergency room after another panic attack. Liz had a full-on nervous breakdown, and the doctors decided to keep her overnight for observation. I was torn between feeling guilty and still being angry, but seeing her like that, so vulnerable and scared, made it hard to stay mad. When we got home the following day, her family was there to support her. Her dad, who had always been a solid, level-headed guy, pulled me aside on the porch for a talk. I braced myself for a confrontation, thinking he was going to ask me to be more understanding, but what he said completely threw me off. He sighed, looking uncomfortable before speaking. "Evan, I know this isn't easy. Liz told us what happened. I just want to say, I'm sorry. I feel like I failed her as a parent. The way her mother and I raised her, this whole idea that what happens before marriage doesn't count. That's on us. It was a stupid mindset to instill in her, and it's caused more harm than good." I blinked, taken aback. I had been ready for a fight, but here he was, taking responsibility for something I never expected. He wasn't defending her actions, but he was trying to explain where her thinking came from. I've told her mother for years that telling the girls that the past doesn't matter once you're married was a mistake. Liz never should have thought that what she did wouldn't have consequences. I just want you to know that no matter what you decide, I respect you. He shook my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger. Maybe it was understanding. Maybe it was just relief that someone in this mess was acknowledging how I felt. Inside comma. Liz was curled up on the couch, looking fragile and exhausted. Her parents left, and we sat there in silence for a long time. I could tell she was waiting for me to say something, to tell her what was going to happen next. But I didn't have any answers. Eventually, comma. I got up, walked over to her, and wrapped my arms around her. She clung to me like I was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over again, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." We stayed like that for a long time. Part of me wanted to pull away, to walk out the door and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, couldn't. After that night, things became a little calmer at home, but not any easier. Liz was doing everything in her power to show me how sorry she was. She was constantly asking if I was okay, trying to talk, leaving me sweet notes, or attempting to act normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. The hardest part was that I still loved her. That was the most confusing and painful part of it all. I couldn't just flip a switch and stop loving her, no matter how much I wanted to sometimes. But every time I looked at her, I was reminded of her betrayal. It was like a permanent scar that I couldn't stop running my fingers over, constantly feeling its presence. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to move forward when this weight was pressing down on me all the time. I started to distance myself emotionally, even though we were still living under the same roof. I slept in the guest room most nights, and our conversations became more superficial. Liz noticed, of course. She tried to talk about it, but every time we tried to have a serious conversation, it spiraled into arguments. I was angry that she hadn't told me sooner, angry that she didn't seem to fully grasp how deep the wound was. And Liz, well, she was frustrated that I couldn't just get over it, that I couldn't see the bigger picture of our marriage now, rather than focusing on what happened years ago. One night, after another tense evening of avoiding real conversation, Liz broke down. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands covering her face, crying quietly. I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say or do. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part of me, the part that felt betrayed, held me back. "Evan," she said through her tears, looking up at me. "I don't know what else to do. I know I messed up and I've apologized 1,000 times, but it feels like nothing I do makes it better. I feel like I'm losing you, and it's tearing me apart." Her voice was raw with emotion, and for the first time in a while, I felt a crack in my resolve. Seeing her like that, so vulnerable, made it hard to stay angry. But it didn't erase what she'd done. Nothing could. "I don't know how to get past this, Liz," I admitted, sitting down across from her. "I love you, but every time I think about what happened, it's like it all comes rushing back. It's like finding out you've been living a lie for years." Liz wiped her eyes, nodding. "I know, and I hate that I've caused you this pain. If I could go back and change everything, I would. But we can't change the past. I don't want to lose us over something that happened before we were married. I love you, Evan, and I need you to know that I've never, ever been unfaithful since we got married. I made a terrible mistake, but it was before we took our vows." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but it didn't change the fact that she had kept this secret from me for years. That was the part that hurt the most, being left in the dark about something so important, something that would have completely changed how I saw our relationship if I'd known sooner. "I get that it was before we were married," I said slowly, trying to find the right words. "But we were still together. You cheated on me, and I didn't even know about it. You let me build a life with you, let me think everything was perfect while you were carrying the secret." Liz looked down, her hands twisting together in her lap. "I didn't want to hurt you. That's why I didn't tell you. I thought that if we were happy now, it wouldn't matter. But I see now that I was wrong. I should have told you, and I'm so sorry for not being honest. There was a long silence between us, and I realized that while Liz was genuinely sorry, it wasn't enough to fix everything. I wasn't even sure what would fix it. All I knew was that I was exhausted, emotionally, mentally, and physically. This whole thing had drained me. I need space, I said finally. I need time to figure out what I want to do. Liz's face fell, but she nodded. I understand, she whispered, her voice cracking. Take as much time as you need. A few days later, I made the decision to move out for a little while. I packed a bag and called my brother Jack to see if I could crash at his place. He didn't ask too many questions, just told me I was welcome anytime. Jack and I weren't incredibly close growing up, but this situation had brought us together in a way I hadn't expected. He'd been my sounding board since I found out about Liz's affair, and I was grateful to have him to lean on. When I told Liz I was going to stay with Jack for a few days, she didn't take it well. Her anxiety flared up again, and she started crying, begging me not to leave. It tore me apart to see her like that, but I knew I needed space to think clearly. I couldn't figure out what I wanted while living under the same roof, where the reminders of our problems were everywhere. I promised her that this wasn't permanent, that I just needed some time to sort through my feelings. It was the truth, but I wasn't sure if that was enough to ease her fears. Liz had a tendency to spiral into worst-case scenarios, and I knew that my leaving, even temporarily, was triggering her anxiety. The day I left, her dad stopped by to talk to me again. He caught me as I was loading my bag into the car, his face lined with concern. I heard you're staying with Jack for a while, he said, his voice heavy. I just want you to know, Evan, that whatever you decide, we're here for you. Liz made a terrible mistake, but we love you like a son. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I nodded, appreciating his support, even though it felt awkward. He was caught in the middle of this mess just as much as I was. I'll be okay, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I just need some space to think. He gave me a small, understanding smile. Take all the time you need. We're rooting for both of you. Living at Jack's place was strange at first, but I quickly settled into the routine. He and I spent our evenings playing Xbox and drinking beer, trying to keep things light and distract me from the chaos that had become my life. Jack didn't push me to talk about Liz, which I appreciated, but every once in a while he'd check in, just to see how I was doing. The first few nights, I found myself lying awake, my mind racing with thoughts of Liz and what had happened. I couldn't stop replaying her confession, the way she had casually dropped the bomb about her affair, the way she had danced with Tom at the wedding, the way she had called me childish for being upset. It was like a never-ending loop of pain and betrayal. I wasn't sure if I could ever get past it, and yet the thought of losing her, of ending our marriage, felt like a whole different kind of pain. I was torn between the love I still felt for her and the hurt that wouldn't go away. One night, after a few weeks at Jack's, I finally called Liz. We had been texting back and forth, but I hadn't actually heard her voice since I moved out. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Evan, I'm so glad you called, she said, her voice trembling. I've been so worried. I know, I said quietly. I'm sorry I've been distant. I just needed time to think. There was a pause, and then she asked, Have you figured out what you want? I don't know, I admitted. I love you, Liz, but I'm still so hurt by what happened. I don't know if I can ever get past it. Liz started crying again, and it tore me apart. I'll do anything, Evan, she sobbed. Anything to make this right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to move forward. I want to fix us. I know you do, I said softly, but it's not that simple. I need time to heal, and I don't know how long that will take. I'll wait, she whispered. For as long as it takes, I'll wait. After that phone call, I felt a little better. At least Liz was giving me space, and I wasn't feeling the constant pressure to make a decision. I still stayed at Jack's place, not rushing anything, and to be honest, I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to go home and try to work things out, but the other part of me was still deeply hurt, not knowing if I could ever trust Liz again. Jack was patient with me, never pushing, but I knew I couldn't crash at his place forever. The situation was wearing me down, and the more time I spent away from Liz, the more confused I became about what I wanted. One Friday night, Jack and I were having a couple of beers after work when he finally asked the question I had been avoiding. "So what's the plan, Evan? You staying here forever, or are you going to figure things out with Liz?" I sighed, leaning back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "I don't know, man. I really don't. Part of me wants to go back and work things out, but part of me is so pissed that I can't imagine just going back to how things were." Jack nodded, sipping his beer. "Yeah, I get that. But you can't stay in limbo forever. Either you try to fix things or you don't. I know it's hard, but sitting here waiting is probably driving you nuts." He wasn't wrong. The uncertainty was eating at me, and I knew I had to make a decision soon. But how? How do you know when it's time to let go or fight for something? A few days later, I went back to the house to pick up some clothes. Liz wasn't home at the time, which I was thankful for. I wasn't ready to face her yet, not without knowing where I stood. The house felt strange, like it wasn't mine anymore. Walking through the living room, seeing all the familiar things, the life we had built together, it felt distant, almost like it belonged to someone else. As I grabbed my stuff from the bedroom, I found one of her notes. She had been leaving little notes for me, even after I left, trying to remind me that she loved me, that she was waiting for me to come back. This one was on the pillow where I used to sleep. "Evan, I miss you. I'm thinking of you every day and praying that we can get through this together. I love you." The note should have made me feel something, hope maybe, but instead, it just reminded me of how broken things were. How could we ever go back to what we had before? Could we even move forward, or was this the beginning of the end? Later that week, I met up with my therapist. She had been a huge help since I found out about the affair, guiding me through the emotional mess and helping me make sense of my feelings. But I was still struggling with what I should do next. "I love Liz," I told her during our session, "but I'm not sure if I can forgive her. I mean, she hid this from me for years. Every time I think about it, I feel like the ground I've been standing on was never solid. How do I move forward when I feel like everything was built on a lie?" She nodded thoughtfully. "It's understandable to feel that way. Betrayal can shake the foundation of any relationship. But the question is, what do you want for your future? Can you see a path forward with Liz, or do you feel like this is something you'll never be able to get past?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "That's the thing. I don't know. Some days I think I can get over it, but other days I just feel so angry and hurt. It's like I'm stuck between two extremes." She leaned forward, her tone calm and steady. "It's important to give yourself grace, Evan. This isn't something you need to figure out right away. Healing takes time. But at the same time, it's crucial to communicate with Liz. If you're willing to try and move forward, even if it's hard, she needs to know that. If you're not, then that's something you both need to face together." Her words stuck with me. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the issue forever, but I also knew I wasn't ready to jump back into things without some kind of clear direction. That weekend, Liz asked if we could meet up for dinner, just to talk. It was the first time she had asked me for a face-to-face conversation since I'd left, and something about her tone made me think it was important. I agreed, even though part of me was nervous about where the conversation would go. We met at a small restaurant not too far from the house. It felt strange to be sitting across from her in such a normal setting when everything between us was so far from normal. Liz looked tired, her eyes puffy like she hadn't been sleeping much, and when she smiled at me, it was small and sad. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly, stirring her drink with the straw. "I've been thinking a lot, and I know you need space, but I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am. For everything." I nodded, unsure of what to say. I had heard her apologies before, but this time there was something different in her voice, something deeper. "I've talked to my parents," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "And to my therapist. I realize now that I've been selfish, that I didn't consider how much I hurt you by keeping this secret. I thought that since we were married it didn't matter anymore, but I see now how wrong that was." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Evan. I really don't. But I want you to know that I love you and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right, even if it means giving you more time or whatever you need." I sat there, letting her words sink in. There was no denying that Liz was sorry, that she was trying. But was that enough? I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I love you, Liz, I really do. But I'm not sure if I can ever forget what happened. I feel like everything we've built together was based on a lie, and I don't know if I can get past that. Tears filled her eyes, and she reached across the table, taking my hand. I understand, she said softly. And if you can't forgive me, I'll respect that. But if there's even a small part of you that's willing to try, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We sat there in silence for a while, holding hands across the table, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I wasn't ready to make a decision that night, but something shifted in me. Maybe it was her vulnerability, or maybe it was just the love I still had for her. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like there might be a way forward. If I was willing to take the risk over the next few days, I thought a lot about that conversation. Liz wasn't asking me to forgive her overnight, but she was asking for a chance to prove that she could be the partner I needed, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. I wasn't sure if I could ever completely heal from the betrayal, but I also knew that walking away would bring its own kind of pain. If I ended things, I'd always wonder what could have been. Could we have worked it out? Could we have rebuilt our marriage stronger than before? Jack noticed that I was quieter than usual, and one evening he asked if I had made a decision. I'm thinking about going back, I told him. I'm not saying everything will be perfect, but I think I owe it to myself, and to Liz, to try. Jack didn't say much, just gave me a supportive nod. If that's what feels right to you, then go for it. Just make sure you're doing it for you, not because you feel pressured. When I finally went home, Liz was waiting for me. Her face lit up when she saw me at the door, but there was a hesitance in her eyes, like she wasn't sure what my return meant. I dropped my bag by the door and took a deep breath. I'm not saying everything is fixed, I began, but I want to try. I want to see if we can rebuild this, Liz. But it's going to take time, and I need you to be patient with me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded, her voice trembling. I'll wait as long as it takes, Evan. I'm just so happy you're home. I walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her for the first time in weeks. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't just pain. It wasn't full-blown hope yet, but it was a step. Maybe that was all we needed, a small step toward healing.